Welcome to Dynamics of Dialogue, your one-stop shop for peace and love on the airwaves, a safe space for people of color and our allies. Join us every week as we have real dialogue with people going through real life. Your dynamic, your dialogue. Come get some. Welcome to Dynamics of Dialogue, and this is your host, Rebel Queen, and I have to say today we're doing something totally different. We're in a Zen situation here. We've got our sage burning. We've got the crystal laid out because we've set intention for today's show. Today's goal, we're talking about racism and whether or not it's a mental illness. When I first heard that, I was a little offended. No, I'm not going to say, I'm going to keep it real. I was offended. I was straight up offended because I felt as a person living with a mental health diagnosis that was giving these people a whole road out, right? And then I came to an understanding through experiencing interactions with some white people that made me think differently, made me think very, very differently about it. So I want to introduce everybody in the studio today. I've got my special guest, Catherine Knight, sitting next to me. Say hello, Catherine.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ty. It's great to be here.
You just want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am I feel like I need to say this, a cis white woman, heterosexual, grew up here in Atlanta. My family's originally from Mississippi. I'm 51, and I'm a retired lawyer. Most of my grown-up years, adult years, were spent divorcing people. I'm now an advocate in a different way because I experienced what you might generically call nervous breakdowns, psychotic breaks, which led me to be identifying now as a psychiatrically disabled person. And that has brought me into a whole different world and different perspective on mental illness. And the experiences that get tied to that have made me a have-not in a lot of situations.
And that's exactly why I invited you on the show, because of your experiences. Because I think your experiences kind of shed light on some things for a lot of people, at least for me. And I'm so grateful for your friendship. Next, we have Takesha Smith today. Excuse me, y'all. I'm so sorry. This is that time of the year. We have Takesha Smith. She's been away for a little bit, but she is back today, and we're happy to have her. You want to say hello and share a little bit about yourself, Takesha, today?
Yes, hello. I'm Takesha Smith, and excuse me, like Ty, I'm a little bit under the weather. The weather is impacting me, so you have to excuse me. But I am a married 44-year-old African-American female. I have 3 children of color. I have 2 males, 1 female, with 2 sons, 1 daughter. And I'm married to a black man, to an African-American man. I am an LCSW, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also what we call a MAT, a medication assisted treatment specialist. And I am a black woman who has encountered racism within the mental health system and within the corporation of the mental health system. I also am a person that, and I openly discuss and disclose that I am a person who lives with major depressive disorder. So I myself have a mental health disorder as well.
And see, this is one of the reasons why Takesha has this seat on this show with us, because she brings such a valuable perspective with your experiences and your transparency and your desire to do something in the community and share and be open. So I'm so grateful for that. And next we have Ella Shea Farmer.
Hello, everyone. I am Ella Shea Farmer. I'm a brand consultant and social media strategist. I have a passion for creative arts and trap music, and I've been helping people bridge the gap between creativity and entrepreneurship since 2010. I just started focusing more on myself within the past year. I was noticing that in the different arenas where any situation that's dominated by white supremacy, I've encountered racism. As I'm not a married woman, I'm a single African American female, mother of one, and there's a certain level of expectation that comes with that. So when I show up and I'm not that person they expect, I have problems. I'm not a statistic. I have 2 degrees. I'm an entrepreneur. Been building myself since, almost a decade. I'm not your stereotypical single black mother.
Right.
So.
And thank you. And that's another reason, aside from just the fact that I value her perspective so much. She brings so much to this table. I think that's the goal here. Is I like to establish community, and I like to establish a safe place for us to have conversation. And I think really in reality, there really is no stereotypical black women. I think it's that we've been stereotyped.
Absolutely.
So it's important to me is to create these spaces for me. And I'm just going to get, because I don't know, I know we get new listeners and everybody doesn't really understand what who I am and what is Rebel Queen. But Rebel Queen is my stage name. I'm a poet. My poetry came about, I started writing poetry when I was 8 years old. And my first poems were about divorce and racism, 2 things that were affecting my life at that time. My parents had told me they were getting a divorce, and as a child, I experienced racism, in ways that are so significant. I'm at 48. I remember my first grade teacher calling me the N-word, and I remember the vitriol that So these are experiences that drive our lives, because of those early experiences. I kind of, I fell into a 25-year IT career, and like you, Catherine, I had an emotional break that changed my life, and wasn't able to work full time any longer, and wasn't able to work in that type of arena. So I spent my life since then dedicating it to things that I'm really passionate about, and whether it's activism or mental health advocacy, those are the areas. So, I want to go back to the race. The race is what impacts us and it drives us all. When Catherine came into the studio today, one of the first things that she did is she pulled out her Bible, and it's her childhood Bible, and she showed me how she's looking at all these pictures and realizing everything is whitewashed. And so for me, what this has done for me is it's made me really present to the people that I know. As an activist, I'm a black woman. I'm a Jamaican American, African American black woman, and I have experiences on both sides of my family with racism. Where we've lost family members and things of this sort. So for me, and I know for anybody that's known me, if you see me on social media going back and forth with trolls, that was my lower dimension tie. But
okay. We all been there.
I'm telling you, because
we all go back sometimes.
It's because it's frustrating, and it's but it's a difficult thing. So I'm not the type of person that's really gullible and just feel sorry for people. But it really. The thing that put me in the space of having this conversation was understanding how necessary it was.
Oh, yeah.
Those activities, when we understand what happens on the internet, I could really, as I started going through my own spiritual growth, I could see arguing back and forth with white people to get them to change their opinion. That doesn't, arguing with anybody.
No, it does not work.
It doesn't work, right? You will not change somebody's mind with facts or opinions. Because lots of people identify this is an identity issue. This is the core of who we are. And we're challenging people at the core of who they are. And Catherine helped me reconnect with that when I started working with her and we started sharing experiences. So Catherine began to share with me, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, because that I've shared with Catherine how that it's opened up a sense of trust again.
Right.
To be able, and I'm going to stop talking in a second, and I'm just laying the stage so that we can understand where we're going with this. But, I think that as children, we don't really see this. We don't deal with racism. And there's a break, right? Society knows that there's a break by the time we hit middle school. Is when we separate. And that was a very painful experience for me to lose some of the friends that I had in that space, to go into high school and realize, okay, and then by the time you get to college, it's very firmly embedded in you. You're different. You're in this place. And
It's
that's
interwoven within our fabrics. Yep.
It's interwoven with our fabric. So Catherine and I started talking about some of her experiences, and she's been growing and learning, and you're reading something right now, Catherine?
Yes. Okay. Well, Ty, first of all, I'm really honored to be here, and but I think I most want to say what a beginner I am in this process. It's kind of like taking up yoga. You know, I can't stand on my head yet in discussions around race. But I think silence around race has such a complicit element to it that I can't do that anymore. So I'm willing to risk failure and microaggressions, and I ask that y'all call me out and give feedback if there's a moment when I say something, because I have been going on air, so to speak, and committing microaggressions, and so I'm learning.
Okay.
But I'm open because what I see, my experience, and I'll make it as personal as possible because I think that's where change begins. It is always, again, I'm terrible. My memory's terrible about, I'm a middle-aged white woman. My memory's gone, but there's this saying that, you can't make change except by a few people, right?
Okay.
And it really does start inside. So for me, when Ty and I met, we met through work around mental health and peers, looking at each other as peers with the experience of the mental health system, and how in the mental health system there's so much stigma and otherness, othering. And to me, it was a kind of the book about white frailty by Robin DiAngelo, which I just finished, It uses the analogy, too, of being a fish and denying the existence of water my whole life, and then going, what? Like, suddenly I'm outside the bubble, and going, well, that was stupid. Like, that's kind of how racism feels. Because once you step out, you just go, wow, well, shoot, what was that? Because some of the most interesting experiences in my life are about being with people who are different than me. And that's where spiritual recovery comes. So mental health, to me, is a cry for the soul's journey, a different cry. It's a change, it's a transmutation time. Everybody I met in the psych wards, and I've been involuntarily committed twice when I wandered into ERs confused, psychotic breaks and that sort of thing are often a spiritual journey, and race,
I think so.
Realization, coming to terms with whatever it means to have or not have melanin in your skin, that in this society. And what I found is diversity, which had always been, because I had a completely bubbled world. It's I don't know, it's like a cult, I would say. Stepping out of the cult and going, oh my God, how deprived was I not to be building connections all my life deeply. I mean, there's exceptions, right? There's always the white person, I have a black friend. But getting into and taking up and putting on your gardening gloves and going out there and trying to grow relationships,
And that authenticity. I will say this, one of the things that Catherine does for me as a friend that makes the space safe is that she's not, I think when we talk about microaggressions, I want you to be aware there's microaggressions like you said, maybe mispronouncing someone's name. That could be intentional, that could be unintentional. I think most of the time it's unintentional. I think the idea when white people do it to us is the idea that you're not important enough, you're not present for me to, it's not significance in me remembering your name. But on the other hand, there are microaggressions that are more egregious and more intentional, and that's how a lot of times the space, we see it all in the news about white women just feeling so self-righteous to stopping black people cooking barbecue, anything, just being black anywhere in public.
Yeah.
Right, and there's this need to correct us. And that's where it gets to be challenging. And I know, Takesha, you said you hadn't heard my story, so I'm going to share it.
Yes.
Because this is where I think these two kind of intersect, in addition to things that you've shared with me. I shared last week, in the last week episode, that I did a brief stint in a mental hospital. I think that's like a sign of social death in my community to say that out loud, but the reality is that I was experiencing symptoms of dissociation that, in my estimation, were dangerous because I was confused. I found that I had been cooking, and I don't remember cooking. I burned myself. I don't remember experiencing any pain at all. All I know is my only evidence that this happened was this burn mark on my arm. And I'm like, okay, I really need to be some space, because that, to me, I think just in all logic, in a situation like that, you need to be where, if you're able to disconnect from your brain to that degree, you need to be somewhere where you're safe. And while I was there was a patient I came across, and he drove me crazy. This man was clearly a Trump supporter. He was turning on Fox News every single freaking day, all day, and there's nothing to do there but watch TV. And every time you turn on it, you go into the break room, he's got Fox News on, talking about the immigrants coming to disrupt us here in America, and it was making me crazy. I got to the point where I just get up and leave. I said earlier, I have no love. I'm that person that was always no love for racists. He was over 70, at least 75 years old, from Augusta, Georgia. I'm pretty sure he's been involved in some pretty heinous things towards people of color, or is at least said or done. I mean, I think the likelihood is pretty slim. But in any event, over the course of the next 6 days, as I observed him, his problem was he was there in relation to an issue, a family issue. So they had him committed. He made a phone call he wasn't supposed to make and said some really horrible things. And he sat down at the table in the morning time where we decompress and talk about why we're there. And he said how he deserved to be punished. And suddenly I watched this 75-year-old man who I was so sure that had done all these horrible things to people. I saw him reduced literally to a child as he broke down and talked about how he deserved to be punished. He deserved to be whipped. He deserved to be beaten. My heart just broke into a million pieces, because in that moment I didn't see a racist in front of me.
You saw a person. You saw someone who was hurt.
Yeah.
And you should
Profoundly.
be able to see him as a child.
I mean, literally, because, and I know, and this is, to see, we talk about how people get into the spaces where they're traumatized.
Right.
We regress back to, it was like I could see him regress to this child age. And everyone's heart just broke. And then several nights we had heard him screaming, and I didn't know what he was saying because he was on the other side. But his roommate told me that he was screaming, "Get off of me. Let me go." No, he's screaming. This man was abused. And what materialized for me was this man carried so much hate inside of him because that's how he felt about himself.
He was hurt.
He was hurt and he was abused. And then it forwarded to the discussion. There was a series on a group of ex-white supremacists. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that.
They were... I think they had, I guess after getting in trouble with the law, after going through anger, is what made them have to confront themselves. And they were saying the one thing that they found that these men had in common was they were abused. And it materialized to me because I realized, back to some of my experiences, I had white friends that I separated from, that we were separated forcibly.
Right.
So there's a whole experience where white people really, it's not just that all white people grow up and just become racist and benefit. There are some people that rebel against it, and if you rebel, there's a price to pay.
Well, you're outcasted.
Right.
They've made that very, very clear. And I mean, I'm not a white woman, so I don't know what that feels like to rebel against racism within my family, but I do know what that feels like to rebel against colorism within my family and the African American community. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that hurt people hurt people. It's a pathology to that. Same thing with abusers. Same thing with pedophiles. Pedophilia is something a little bit different, but child molesters, people who have been abused and molested and hurt themselves tend to streamline that right along to someone else. So it is contagious. I think it's important to understand, to know what racism is and what mental illness is. What racism was designed from, the root of racism, why race even exists, is important. That was created to systemically keep us apart, and to fuel an us against them mentality. And it was only going to manifest into any and everything that we do, right into the mental health system, in corporate America and everywhere else. So just to bring it full circle, I want people to just be aware of how your actions contribute to 20, 30 years down the road, and how they manifest into so many other dysfunctions and behaviors.
I think it's important to talk about that inner child, because a lot of us have not met our inner child.
We don't even know it exists.
We don't know it exists. We don't know how much that child is hurting.
Oh, big time.
And we don't know how we project that hurt onto other people.
And continue to do it. And we feed there's an inner child that is the one that is vulnerable, the one that you saw in that fetal position. Then there's an inner child that's, and I don't like to say this as a child, but then there's this monster, this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde complex. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. And whichever one you choose to feed is the one that will grow.
That inner child conversation is core, because as you stated earlier, I think, Keisha, you said you don't know what it's like to rebel against, racism in the family. But all of us know what it's like to rebel against the family.
Oh, yeah. In
Don't
some
you
way,
dare.
shape, or form.
But
don't you dare rebel against your family.
Listen, I want you all to listen to some of the things Catherine has to say, because, it materialized for me things on a different level.
Okay.
So for them, and I keep talking about this, so y'all please forgive me, because I'm trying to be present too, whether or not, now that, my heart, I felt like the Grinch. And my heart just opened up to be a mile wide.
But that's significant, though. That transition is significant, because a lot of us we don't see white people, we see them as opposition, not people.
Right.
They're not people to us. They're racist. We label them any kind of way other than a hurt human being.
Well, we do the same thing. We do to them what's been done to us.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's that projection again.
It's the mirroring.
That hurt, that mirroring that you speak of.
Right.
But it is, as a black woman, I come from a diversified family. So there is, when I show up at my family reunions on my maternal side, there are white people there on my maternal side, not so much on the paternal, but I do see, even within that, a period of separation. And I've heard those stories, and maybe you can further elaborate, of how that was trying to integrate this person of color into your family. And I think my aunt said this was like in the 60s, and how tough that was, and how you can be labeled, or this other person, the in-law, as an outcast. Like you're, no, we're good people and we're good Christian folks and all, but don't you dare bring these black people in our house talking about you gonna marry and procreate with them. That in itself is a story, like it's a contradiction of what's presented, and that's a whole nother story. That's how a lot of people get pushed away from religion, because it's a clear contradiction of what you say your word is.
Right.
But that's the lesson. That's the lesson that you learn. If you do go against this, there's consequences. You don't have to. You can believe what you want, but we're going to shun you.
But don't do it.
But don't do it.
Yeah. Don't do it.
I actually had someone, when I was back a long time ago when I was waiting tables, I was in the good old state of Indiana, and I don't know if anybody's familiar, but just because we're up north doesn't mean we're exempt from racism. So we used to be called Clandiana. There's places that you don't even stop still to this day. There's places that they're known sundown towns in Indiana. And we still don't go there.
I thought those places existed in Georgia and in the South.
Oh, baby, no. We don't get off the highway in Indiana.
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you all this story, because, stories are powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm going to let Catherine go into hers. But talking about those sundown towns, Forsyth County.
Oh, yes.
When I was working in IT, and this is an experience I've had since I've been here 20 years, working in corporate. Our director had this big party at their house, and they lived in Forsyth County, of course, the vice president of the agency. So we're having this party all day, and of course, everybody comes, because it's kind of you need to be there. So the black employees all know we gonna get our tails out of there by sundown. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm ready to go, right? And so my VP and his wife, they come up to me and they're talking to me because about interactions with my son. They were he's just so smart, he's so bright, and what does he like to do? Because my son has always been a very fascinating kid. He's been into everything. So they're talking to me, and so I'm trying to get out. And they don't understand that. How do I tell these people I need to leave before sundown so I don't get jacked up by the cops? Mm-hmm. Right. And then my son, I look up and my son is running behind them. Right, they're talking to me, they're facing me, and my son is running behind them with the soccer goal on his head, playing with the other kids. And I'm like, oh my God, I just couldn't get out of there quick enough. But lo and behold, when I left, it was dark. And when it started to get dark, we're riding down the car. Riding down the way, and sure enough, this white female officer pulls me over and tells me that my tail light is out and that I was swerving, driving erratically. And I'm like, God, bring it. Here it is right here. Mm-hmm.
So they told you to go.
And I was instantly angry because I just did not get out of Forsyth County in time to avoid that mess. And do you know what got me out of that situation? My son sat there. That was the beginning of the next level of my anger, because he was just a child. He was about 9 years old, and he sat there and saying, is she going to take you away? And I was furious, the rage that built up in me. And as I was sitting there with that rage building up in me, my director, my boss, happened to pull up behind us. She is a white South African woman. She pulls up and asks the officer, is everything okay? In her South African accent. She's very heavy. She's been here for years, for almost 25, 30 years, but she still is very heavy. And all of a sudden, there's no problem at all. And the officer lets me go. There's no problem. Because now... she's understanding.
White privilege stepped in and validated you with what was likely a racially motivated traffic stop.
And she absolutely recognized that, because she was riding behind me the entire time.
She saw it.
And she saw it.
She saw it
She is South African. One of the reasons why she left left as a result of, because she's just, it didn't resonate with her, the experience, and she's just like, I should, move on. Yeah. So she felt like she knew it. And so this is what I mean. This is the difference between an ally and an accomplice. That's an accomplice. Oh, yes. A person that's willing to take an action. Yes, a co-conspirator, of which Catherine Knight is. So
as a co-conspirator.
She's one of my favorite co-conspirators.
Well, and I think it's important. Okay, so all these stories are so personal, and I think that's what I have experienced in the past few years, is I feel a somewhat forcible ejection from my culture that I grew up in, socially, even within the legal system. Like I've retired from law in part because part of my psychological brain state shifting has been to focus on character and morality and justice that's real justice. So the justice system became tainted as I just couldn't get another woman, out of domestic violence, because the whole justice system often has so many biases and prejudices, and racism is that in action, right? Racism, that's what I was learning, is that it's so systemic.
Very.
It is the water we swim in, and I became more and more agoraphobic. I still suffer from that. Like that coming here today is because I feel now with like a turtle with no shell. My shell was white supremacy, I think. Not to say that I don't still have all sorts of vestiges, because it's like growing up in a cult. And I never grew up in a cult other than to say, this has been my experience. But when I hear people talk about leaving, whether it be Scientology or what have you, and because religion is so steeped in it, it's been used to justify, because I am a Christian, but I grew up with people who were like snake handlers on mountains, practically Baptists and alcoholics, both of whom were the same people, right? That's the same people. and so my white Mississippi Delta, Alabama Hills kind of history genetically is so steeped in white privilege, you can't unentwine it. And so my mother recently told me about this family land that I grew up identifying with every summer, going there and playing basically Gone with the Wind, right? And as I've told Ty, we've bonded over genealogy and the exploration, and coming to realize that it was my relatives who waited till the Trail of Tears was done, right? Waiting, like celebrating their own little made-up Thanksgivings. Waited till the Trail of Tears was done, and then moved into their plantations and owned slaves. And relatives of mine in this generation are still proudly displaying on Mississippi walls ownership documents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we had family reunions.
Yeah.
In the last decade, right? So I'm just telling you, when I say I grew up, I did live in New York for a while, and I went to Princeton, and then I went back. And so I've had education to look at things differently. But even there, I was very much a white, I'm 51 now, back in the day, I was very much a white feminist, a white progressive. And, those, we can be the worst kind, right? Because I was so unconscious to racism until I had my psychotic breaks. I know that's strange, but it really tore me up that like everything was a lie, right? Everything was a lie. Jesus didn't just minister to little white children who grew up in the 1950s.
On the beach.
On the beach, no less. Blondes.
Blondes.
That wasn't special.
No.
And then I began
And not
to
in Egypt.
And it wasn't even true.
And not even where you went, right? This is nothing
this made sense.
It's like when you find out Santa isn't quite Santa. And everything
Santa isn't real.
I was an adult.
Right.
And you grow up being told that race really, well, first of all, and then you had we're all post-racial, right, if we're progressive, during the Barack Obama delusion that racism didn't exist anymore, because it not only exists, apparently it's thriving.
Yes.
It's setting our national agenda.
Yeah.
So we don't have any time to ignore this
I'm glad
anymore.
to hear you say that, including the piece about progressive white women are white feminist.
Yes.
Because that's not being said. And I haven't said that, but I've heard, and I'm going to speak for my husband on this one as a black male. We've had dialogue about some of these very same conversation, and he himself as a black male, and a few other ones, agree with what you just said about that feeling where that could be the heaviest.
The hardest to turn. Well, we know that from elections, right? White women right now, and I'm just trying, but one thing, this is where my white frailty comes in, okay? And I'm not going to cry, but I mean, it's hard to have any friends left. This is where, because like we're talking about the meaningfulness of new friendships for me, they have an extra weight. And as I said, when I called Ty on the way over here, I said, okay, as a person, can I be white and frail for a minute? Because I'm about to cry, right? Okay. Because as a friend, right?
Right.
Because we become friends. That's the thing about it is that we are all, this was a lie. This was a total lie. But the white people, we've had a good run of it, right? We tried. It has really been all about lying and colonialism, domination, power. And white women are like Stockholm syndrome. I'm not trying to excuse us, but there is a Stockholm syndrome that goes on because were told this is where feminism does matter, because we did experience we are not full people.
Right. Right.
And so it made sense that black people weren't full people either.
Right.
Because we were living in a hierarchy where we weren't real people and they weren't either, and these were maybe more or less or something. And they talked about people in terms of their, the percentage blood in them, right? It's all a big bad science.
Yeah, none of it works unless you believe it.
It's all a big eugenics, all that stuff. Basically, the word psychology, because psychiatry and mental health, because the psychosis in the civil rights movement, they were throwing black men who were having protest psychosis. This is back before the DSM.
COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO used
I don't know what that is.
COINTELPRO is the program that took down the Panther Party.
Okay.
They infiltrate. They did a lot of insidious things.
It's a secret thing in the black community. We all know about it,
It's
but
the
people
government.
outside of us don't. They think they said it was a conspiracy.
It actually.
There's been a whole special on that. Actually, I've seen it, but you're absolutely right, Ty.
It's
Yes.
the counterintelligence.
Say what
It was
it's
the
called again.
FBI's COINTELPRO is short for
COINTELPRO.
counterintelligence program.
And I think we might.
And part of that was psychological warfare.
That was the core of it.
That was the core.
And they were able to convince people that the revolutionaries, and I'm using finger quotes, I know you all can't see me, but revolutionaries were attacking the American government. So that was able to get the American people against this group.
And part of that was
Sounds familiar.
Part of that was also to forcibly instill a sense of paranoia. People don't recognize the Panthers had to leave. Lots of Panthers had to leave their families. They had to move into areas where like these
like witness protection program.
and they were living in poverty.
Even Black Lives Matter
Movement.
members. Okay, so and this is why I wasn't joking, and I took off my cat ears. I shouldn't have, but because this is where it gets really serious. Because, and I don't know enough about this, but Black Lives Matter family members and are disappearing. Like founders and their family members.
I just read an article about that.
Right, and in like a statistically weird rate, right? Like where you'd be like, why are these people disappearing? And I just,
and there's a silence about it. Like, why is that not being
being spoken about?
Right.
And there's such a history in our country about dividing, making race be the lightning rod. When our country is so diverse now, you don't know what anyone's background is by looking at them.
Well, in reality,
you cannot.
Science says, honestly, like she said before, race is nothing but a device.
Right.
So white doesn't exist, black doesn't exist, none of that exists. What exists is that as race is Homo sapiens.
Right.
The Neanderthals have pretty much died off. There were, Homo nebula, Homo sapien, and so on and so forth. So what the race left on the planet is the human race.
Right.
It's Homo sapien. And science even acknowledges now that all of us did come from Africa, right? That the original man was an African man. Of course, that's just the name of the continent.
Right.
But that's where life originated. That's why you can have black people. That's why they use Henrietta Lacks cells for cancer treatment, because we can produce every shade of color. But Africans weren't just this. We were all ranges. So it is a device. And I think we're going to need to learn how to change the language, because I think what's happening now is that it's to the point where I watched the Trevor Noah episode. The white ladies, where one white lady was insulting another white lady by calling her a white lady. It's bizarre to me.
Well, it is. There's so many, because we don't want to go too close, as this book was teaching me about color blindness, because that's a whole nother thing. Because even though we are the melting pot, the history here of white people versus people with African Americans, okay, the history of slavery here, and then the history of immigration. So both, and the Native Americans before that. So it's just been one round of domination after another. But okay, and I can go really macro and say this is capitalism eating us up. We're in the olden days, it would take poor whites. Racism was the whole point, was to make sure they didn't band with the other have-nots, which at the time, because people of color were coming out of terribly systemic disadvantage, right? So they're coming out, and they're the have-nots, and they're not supposed to see commonality. Segregation led to an ability to have the richest people, and they were mostly white men.
Right.
There were very few women anywhere on that whole thing, unless they inherited it. So at the top, the white men. And here's where, this is where I get kind of because I have sat in very elite circles. In my day, I may be psychiatrically disabled now, but in my day, I was pretty sharp, and I was able to sit I worked on Wall Street Bank.
Just so you know, they
lawyer.
are too. I'm sorry.
What?
I have to come out and say that, because you'll label yourself as psychiatrically disabled, but know that to some degree, you don't come through life unscathed or untouched. So you were not the only one then or now sitting in that. In that arena.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Because I think, anyway, so I sat there and I saw white power in action. It's an action. It's decisions by collectively groups of just white men generally, right? What
Right.
women get in there, but I can assure you we're often shut up, right?
Oh, yes.
Right.
So
I've
Shut
been
up in the
there.
spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
I've been
very
there.
hard.
You don't have a
Yes.
voice in those spaces.
No.
You're just here.
Right.
You're here to be
So
seen.
This is
Yeah,
where I
that's
think
it.
women, like, we need to white women need to fast get over these blinders, which is what it is, and not see unity in finding ways to build bridges into diversity and to acknowledge our past. Like, that's where racism, well, that's the uncomfortable conversations,
But
right?
I'm going to ask you,
They have decided on what level of misery they're going to live in, and they get the relief.
I was going to say, I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
As a white woman, say if I was a white woman, what would be my motivation to support and vote for anything for this black woman? Here's what, there were a number of white women that voted for this current governor, okay? And when I speak to other white women about why they voted for him, even this president, all of his benefits, okay, and what they benefited them.
Yes.
They don't deal with, I have a friend, a colleague, who she's white and she has white males. She don't have the same insecurities, the same worries that I do for my
Economically,
and just for our children's
safety,
lives.
right? With police
that she
interaction
does.
and all
So
Yeah.
Stacey Abrams was not going to benefit anything to her, but this other white male governor, it was that commonality, that mirroring that you talk about. So as a white woman, why would I vote for somebody who's yes?
Okay,
She's
because
Catherine's waving her hand. You all couldn't see it. She wanted to
I'm a
speak.
good student. I'm learning. Okay, I'm a beginner. I'm not an expert. But what I would say to that is our humanity depends on it. We cannot be a society of hate. There's a meme out there that says, okay, so, of course we all know statistically, very shortly, whites are going to be in the minority. And there's a meme out there that says, so what? What? Is there a problem? Do y'all treat your minorities badly over there?
I remember that.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
why would it matter? Because we're all
hilarious.
equal, right?
It's
Because
hilarious.
Because we're not, and that's where
you
the
know
fear,
we're
that
not. And
fear
your
is coming
system-
from.
know
Your
Yeah.
system benefits on everyone. Not if there was equality, you would have no effective system.
Yes.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that but I've been told this. People think their humanity is just starting home only. It's that nationalist mentality, as us first, needs to protect like. There is
Right.
that. And how do you bridge that? I don't know. That's why I have no friends.
I have a question.
Because I don't know. There is a cult
understanding
mentality.
that this is not just a melting pot, 'cause
Right.
It's not, but this is a salad. It's like a fruit salad, and that's
Right.
the meme
Yeah.
that we have to come with is that we're all in this together. And I think you said that
How
earlier.
How are we going to find progress in our society because this is where my story, I think, because there is no safety net. That's the big joke. Okay? There's none, zero. Okay, and if you become a have-not any time in your life, which is going to happen more and more, like none of
some
us
point
are
in
doing
time
well,
it is.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
of the breakdown of economics, we're all poor now, and we're all got student loan. We all got there's only this many people, and I'm making an inch sign, are rich, and so at some point we're going to have to realize that it could be you any minute. Those white women are living with a lot of debt and fragility that they're hanging on
It's
by
just
their
a matter of time
pinkies.
before it circles around into the white culture.
It is in a way.
Yeah.
Not that you have to wait.
It's like
but
teenage pregnancy. It's like cocaine. It's like crack. It's just a matter of time before it circles back around.
because there'll be the next economic crash. You can't build a society on
That's
hate
right.
with no caring for
That's
your
right.
weak. And this is where the religionist comes back to me. Okay. Because when I was out there helping mentally ill folks in rural Georgia, I met a man who was identified as schizophrenic. And he told me that I could say anything I wanted as long as it was true, as long as, it sort of felt like God was trying to work through me, because I had a huge army of angels that were my relatives doing karma. Okay, having their karma, they're like on horses, all on horseback, and they are doing, their karma is to be my guardian angel because they all are from the 1860s. Like all my slave-owning relatives and all the folks who did all bad stuff, just came back from the Montgomery Museum with lynching and such, right? Those relatives of mine are having to protect me as I call them out. Does that make sense?
It does, because I do.
Does that sound crazy?
Well,
I am a bit crazy.
Well, I said, because I'm a bit too. I'm a bit too. But we're going to have to wrap this conversation up because we are coming to part 2 next week, and I'm going to ask you all to do 3 things, okay? Because I knew we had to do this in 2 parts because this is such a powerful conversation. I'm going to ask you to, number 1, comment your thoughts on this thread. Comment your thoughts on the conversation that we're having. We're going to have part 2 next week. Follow us on social media at Official DFD. You can join our community at officialdfd.com and join our conversation next week. I'll be so happy to see you. Tune in, 3 o'clock.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our show. Tune in every Sunday at 3 p.m. at officialdfd.com. Follow us on social media at officialdfd. Your dynamic, your dialogue. Come get some.